Hey everyone, it's Professor Clark, and in this lecture we are going to learn some new verbs and go over some refinements in our knowledge of verb conjugation. Let's start by talking about first conjugation verbs with end stress. Your textbook has all kinds of verbs in this section, and I really recommend looking at the tables and charts it has of these various verbs. We're just going to go over a few of the most interesting or unusual ones here. And so we're going to start with these end-stressed first conjugation verbs, and specifically the verbs idти and wstawać. So as you probably remember, I'm sure that you remember this very well from an earlier lecture. If you have a first conjugation verb and the stress falls on the ending, instead of yeah, the vowel is your. And this happens with both vowel stem and consonantal stem verbs. Either of them can have this your in the ending if the stress falls on the ending. Let's look at a couple of new to us verbs where this happens. And let's start with the verb idти, which is to go on foot unidirectional. And we will learn more about verbs of motion in a bit, and you will understand why what I just said was important. But let's just start with the verb idти, which is one of the verbs of motion in Russian. First of all, note that the infinitive ends not in te мягкий знак, but te I. There are a small handful of verbs where this happens. When you see that, little alarm bells should be going off in your head. First of all, little alarm bells should be going off in your head because most of the verbs where you have t instead of te мягкий знак for the infinitive are verbs of motion. And anytime you see a verb of motion, you should start thinking, okay, I need to watch out. I need to watch out. Second of all, anytime you have this t ending instead of te мягкий знак, you're probably going to have an end-stressed verb. So let's look at idти. We just drop the t and then we add the regular first conjugation endings. But these are going to be the regular first conjugation endings for an end-stressed consonantal stem verb. So they will be just like жить. Я иду, ты идешь, она идет, мы идем, вы идете, они идут. And again, notice that these endings are just like жить. So we have живу, живешь, живет, иду, идешь, идет. These are perfectly regular endings. We just pop them onto the id stem after we drop the t. Another end-stressed first conjugation verb is вставать, to get up. And this is part of a small but important class of verbs, which are these ava verbs or va verbs. And with these ava verbs, we drop the va when we conjugate it, and then we add a stressed ending. So what you get is a vowel stem and stressed verb. You can see вставать and then я встаю, ты встаешь, он встает, мы встаем, вы встаете, они встают. And again, these are perfectly regular endings. We just drop the va, and then we add these perfectly regular first conjugation endings. And it is you, ute, because we have a vowel stem verb. So it's going to be the same as with читать, for example. But because it's stressed, we're going to have ёж, ёт. But these are all perfectly regular endings. You just have to watch out for something happening in the middle of the verb before you add the ending. Now let's talk about some second conjugation verbs that you meet in this section of the textbook. And there are important things to remember about second conjugation verbs. First of all, you always want to watch out for the 8-letter spelling rule for second conjugation verbs. So if you see a husher in the middle of your second conjugation verb, you know that the 8-letter spelling rule is going to come into effect when you conjugate it. Second of all, second conjugation verbs are more likely to have a stress shift in the non-past tense. Let's have a look at the verb смотреть, to look or to watch. And we notice here that it has a stress shift. Anytime you see a disyllabic verb, you want to watch out for a stress shift. So we have смотреть with the stress on the second syllable in the infinitive. Я смотрю, the stress remains on the second syllable. But ты смотришь. Now the stress is going to shift to the first syllable and it's going to remain there for the rest of the paradigm. So он смотрит, мы смотрим, вы смотрите, они смотрят. This is very common for 2-syllable or disyllabic second conjugation verbs, but it doesn't happen with all of them. Let's look at the verb ложиться, to lie down. It is also disyllabic. You notice it has 3 syllables because we're adding the reflexive particle, cia, but the root of the verb is disyllabic, but it does not have a stress shift. This is somewhat uncommon for second conjugation verbs, but it does happen, so you just have to know on a verb-by-verb basis. However, because it has a husher stem, we note that the 8-letter spelling rule comes into effect with it. So, я ложусь, ты ложишься, она ложится, мы ложимся, вы ложитесь, они ложатся. And just pay attention to how the 8-letter spelling rule comes into effect and how the reflexive particle is used. So, с мягкий знак after the я and вы forms, and с, я after all the other forms. So there you have some of the more interesting verbs in this section. I really do recommend that you go over all the verbs in this section and write them out by hand, say them out loud, and try to memorize them in all of their forms.